It was a quiet afternoon on the sea. The sun was shining high above, the waves were gentle, and the air felt clean and warm. The Coast Guard team, led by Officer Daniels, was on routine patrol off the Florida Keys. They were used to days like this, calm, slow, and uneventful. Nothing ever happened out here, at least not often. Most boats they stopped were fishing boats, tourists, or the occasional small yacht. Their job was to check for licenses, safety gear, and anything suspicious. Usually people were friendly, showed their papers, smiled, and moved on. But on this particular day, something strange happened. The Coast Guard vessel picked up a boat on radar. It wasn't going fast. In fact, it seemed to be moving a little too slowly for its size. That was the first thing that caught Officer Daniels' eye. He was an experienced man, in his early 40s, with sharp eyes and a calm way of handling things. He'd seen a lot in his time, but something about this boat made him pause. It wasn't showing any flag, which was unusual. All registered vessels flying through these waters had some sort of flag. A U.S. flag, a state flag, or at least a company banner. This boat had nothing. Just a clean white mast and a pale gray hull. Daniels narrowed his eyes. The shape of the boat looked like it had been customized. It didn't match the common designs they usually saw. He ordered his crew to get a closer look. As the Coast Guard vessel approached, the mystery boat didn't speed up or try to turn. It just kept cruising slowly, quietly, like it didn't care who was watching. That's when Daniels decided to signal the boat to stop. They used the radio first, standard procedure. The Coast Guard hailed the boat on all frequencies. Unidentified vessel. This is the U.S. Coast Guard. Please respond and identify yourself. There was no answer at first, just static. Then, after the third call, a voice finally came through. It was calm, low, and steady. Copy that, Coast Guard. Standing by. Daniels leaned in. Please state your vessel's name and registration number. Silence. Seconds passed. The radio remained quiet. Then the voice returned. Name is not important. We are passing through on peaceful grounds. Daniels looked at his second-in-command, Officer Brooks, a younger officer who had only been on the job for 3 years. Both men knew something wasn't right. Daniels repeated the request. We need to verify your identity and registration. This is standard protocol. Please comply. Still, the man on the other end didn't give the name of the boat or his full identity. That hesitation, that single moment of silence, changed everything. Daniels didn't waste time. Prepare for boarding, he said. The Coast Guard team got ready quickly. They had done this hundreds of times, but this time everyone could feel the tension. No one knew what to expect. As they pulled up beside the strange vessel, they saw the crew. 4 men on deck, all wearing plain clothes, no uniforms, no name tags. No one was smiling. No one waved. Just blank faces. That was unusual. Normally, boat crews were either curious or nervous when approached. These men looked empty. Daniels climbed aboard first, followed by 2 of his men. We're going to need to inspect your ship, he said firmly. One of the crew members, a tall man with sunburned skin, nodded and stepped aside without a word. Daniels walked around the deck. Everything looked clean. Too clean. Like it had been wiped down recently. No signs of fishing gear, no signs of travel, no food or drinks lying around. It felt like a boat that was trying not to leave any traces. Inside, the Coast Guard found something even stranger. The lower deck had several storage compartments. They were locked tight, and each had temperature controls, digital panels showing carefully maintained conditions. The kind of equipment you'd find in a laboratory or a medical transport, not a regular boat. Daniels asked what they were carrying. Scientific samples, one crew member replied. No paperwork, no documentation, no permits. Daniels asked again. What kind of samples? The same answer came. Sensitive biological samples. Not dangerous, but confidential. Daniels raised an eyebrow. You're in public waters. You need to provide documentation if you're transporting sensitive material. Still, no documents were given. That was when Daniels turned to the captain, the man who had spoken on the radio. He hadn't said a word since they boarded. He was standing near the helm, arms crossed, eyes watching every movement. He was older, maybe late 50s, with a weathered face and a long scar running down his left cheek. His hair was gray, but his body language was strong, controlled, like a man used to command. Daniels approached him slowly. Sir, we need to see your identification. The man looked at Daniels for a long time. His eyes didn't blink. Then he said quietly, It won't help you. Daniels was now officially alert. Why don't you let us decide that? The man hesitated again. Then he pulled a small wallet from his pocket and handed over an ID. Daniels took it, expecting something fake or expired. But when he read the name, his heart skipped a beat. Elias, Captain Elias Monroe. It wasn't just the name. It was the name. Daniels remembered hearing about Monroe years ago when he was just starting his service. Monroe had been a decorated Navy captain, brilliant, fearless, and known for completing missions that others failed. But one day, he vanished, disappeared without a trace during a secret mission in the South Pacific. There were rumors that he had stolen something from the Navy, something big. Others said he died at sea. The case had gone cold. The files were sealed. Daniels never expected to hear that name again. And now, here he was, standing on a boat that had no name, carrying unknown cargo, with a crew that said nothing and a captain who was supposed to be dead. Daniels stepped back. His hand instinctively went to his radio, but he didn't say anything yet. He was thinking. Fast. What if this wasn't just a strange boat? What if Monroe was alive and had been all this time? What was he carrying? Where had he been? The rest of the crew was silent too. Everyone felt the shift in the air. Something big was happening. This was no ordinary inspection anymore. Daniels handed the ID to Officer Brooks, who read the name and froze. Even he had heard of Monroe. That's how well known he had been in military circles. Daniels looked at Monroe again. Is this really you? Monroe simply nodded. It is. Daniels didn't know what to do next. He had authority over the waters, but if this really was Elias Monroe, a man tied to old Navy secrets and missing classified tech, then this was no longer just Coast Guard business. Brooks whispered, Sir, should we detain him? Daniels shook his head slightly. Not yet. Not without knowing more. He turned to Monroe. Captain, what's in those containers? Monroe smiled just a little. Nothing that concerns you. Not yet. The way he said it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a warning. Daniels knew one thing for sure. This routine stop had become something far beyond his team's normal patrol. They had stumbled into a mystery that began a decade ago and hadn't been solved since. And now, somehow, it had floated back into their hands, on a quiet afternoon, in the middle of calm waters. Let me know when you're ready for part 2, and I'll continue the story in the same tone and length. Daniels couldn't stop staring at the man in front of him. Captain Elias Monroe. The name still echoed in his mind. A man once respected across military ranks. A man who had vanished. A man everyone believed was dead or worse. Yet here he stood, alive, calm, mysterious, and surrounded by silence. There were so many questions running through Daniel's head, but he didn't even know where to begin. The boat was quiet. Too quiet. The crew said almost nothing. The strange silence only made the air feel heavier. Monroe didn't look scared or angry. He looked like someone who already knew what would happen next, like a man with a plan. Daniels walked slowly back to the lower deck where the storage compartments were. Those locked metal containers were still sitting in place, humming slightly from their cooling systems. He stood in front of one and pressed the side. Cold. The digital panel next to it showed the inside temperature, -10 degrees Celsius. Whatever was inside was being kept cold. Very cold. Daniels called over Officer Brooks. "Scan these containers again," he said. Brooks pulled out the handheld scanner, a device meant to detect chemicals, radioactive materials, or explosives. He waved it over the metal boxes one by one. The machine beeped once, twice, then went silent. No warning signs. Nothing illegal. But still, Daniels didn't feel good about it. Not knowing what was inside made it worse. They opened one of the smaller storage doors nearby, not one of the locked ones. Inside were dozens of sealed tubes, like the kind used for blood samples or genetic testing. Each tube was labeled with a code, but there was no documentation, no names, no origins. Daniels picked up one of the tubes and looked at the strange glowing liquid inside. It was light blue and looked like it was gently pulsing, almost alive. He put it back carefully. "What the hell is this stuff?" Brooks whispered. Daniels didn't answer, because he didn't know. He walked back up to the captain. "You said these are scientific samples." "What kind?" Daniels asked. "Samples from a project that was never meant to see daylight," Monroe replied. His voice was soft but clear. "We're not breaking the law, but the law doesn't cover this kind of thing." Daniels frowned. "Then who does?" Monroe looked at the sky for a moment, as if thinking about his answer. "People who no longer exist on paper. Places that were erased from maps. Missions that never happened." Daniels didn't like that answer. Not because it sounded fake, but because it sounded real. Too real. "You're going to have to give me more than that." Monroe nodded slowly. "Soon you'll get a call, and when you do, I suggest you listen carefully." Daniels stared at him. That strange calmness again. Like Monroe knew something they didn't. Daniels was trained to follow procedure, to trust evidence and rules. But Monroe wasn't acting like a criminal. He was acting like a messenger. Down below, another officer had begun inspecting the engine room. Daniels joined him. The engine was surprisingly high-tech, newer than the rest of the boat. Modified parts, military-grade components, and strange attachments that no civilian boat should have. It looked like it had been upgraded for speed and silence. Daniels realized the boat was built for stealth. Whoever designed it knew how to avoid radar, how to avoid noise detection, and how to disappear. Back on the main deck, the crew stood, quietly, not moving. Daniels asked one of them his name. The man didn't answer, just stared straight ahead. Daniels asked again. Nothing. Brooks stepped forward. "These guys, they're trained." Daniels nodded. He could feel it now. This wasn't just a crew. These were operatives, not military, not Coast Guard, but something in between. They weren't afraid, and they weren't surprised. They had been ready for this stop. Daniels tried the radio again. He contacted the main base and told them they had intercepted an unregistered vessel with suspicious cargo and a captain who claimed to be Elias Monroe. The voice on the other end paused for a long time before replying. "Hold your position," the base said. "We're sending a higher authority." Daniels wasn't sure what that meant. He tried asking again, but the reply was short. "Do not proceed further. Wait for instructions." He put the radio down, confused. They were in U.S. waters. Why wasn't he allowed to continue? This was his jurisdiction, but it didn't feel like it anymore. Back on the deck, Monroe sat down on a bench and looked out at the sea. "You don't have to be afraid of what's in those containers," he said without turning around. "But you should be afraid of who wants them." Daniels walked over. "Who wants them?" "Everyone who shouldn't," Monroe replied. "When I left 10 years ago, I didn't run away. I disappeared so I could keep this safe. Daniels narrowed his eyes. Safe from who? Monroe looked at him. His face was serious, and his eyes looked tired, like someone who had carried a heavy secret for too long. From the people who created it, and from those who would sell it. Daniels took a deep breath. What is it? Monroe hesitated. Not a weapon. Not in the traditional sense. But in the wrong hands, it could change the world in ways we're not ready for. Daniels didn't know what to say. Everything about this felt bigger than anything he had trained for. He was a lawman, a Coast Guard officer, not a spy, not a government agent. But right now he was standing in the middle of something that felt like both. Suddenly a noise came from above, a distant chopping sound. They looked up. A black helicopter was approaching fast. No markings, no identification numbers. It hovered over them for a moment before lowering itself slowly just above the sea. The wind from the blades blasted across the boat. Daniels got on his radio. Unmarked aircraft overhead, requesting confirmation. No reply. The helicopter dropped a rope ladder, and within seconds, 3 figures slid down. They were dressed in black. Full tactical gear, no visible badges. One of them approached Daniels and handed him a small sealed folder. It was labeled Confidential, for eyes only. Daniels opened it. Inside was a single line. Stand down. Release all. Custody. This operation is no longer under Coast Guard authority. Daniels looked up in shock. Who are you? The man in black didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Monroe and gave a small nod. Monroe stood up and walked over to them calmly. One of the crew members followed and began unlocking the containers. Daniels stepped forward. Wait, you can't just take over this boat. The man in black looked at him, then spoke the only sentence he would say that day. You were never here. Daniels stared at Monroe, who simply said, Thank you for not pulling the trigger. Daniels felt something shift inside him. A mix of confusion, frustration, and something else. Regret. Monroe and his crew, along with the mysterious team in black, began transferring the containers onto a second vessel that had appeared silently from the mist. It was like watching a ghost operation. Fast, clean, and impossible to stop. Within 30 minutes, they were gone. No trace, no evidence. Daniels and his team stood on the now empty mystery boat. The only proof they had, Monroe's ID, was also taken. His own ship received a final order. Erase all records of contact. Wipe the radar. Delete the logs. Daniels sat down, staring out at the sea. He had followed all the rules, but the rules hadn't mattered. He had stopped a ghost, and that ghost had vanished again. Officer Daniels didn't sleep that night. He sat at his desk in the Coast Guard station, replaying every moment from the encounter with Captain Elias Monroe. The man who was supposed to be dead. The man who was carrying something so secret. Even the Coast Guard had to back off. Daniels kept thinking about the containers, the unmarked helicopter, and the message that told him to erase everything. He had followed that order, technically. The files were deleted, the logs wiped, and the crew told to stay silent. But the memories were still alive in his mind, and they weren't going anywhere. His partner, Officer Brooks, sat quietly across the room, tapping his fingers on the desk. He hadn't said much either. Everyone on the team had the same confused, haunted look in their eyes. None of them were rookies. They had seen storms, drug runners, human traffickers, even dangerous pirates. But this was different. This wasn't about criminals or rules. This felt like something from a movie. Something that wasn't supposed to be real. After a long silence, Brooks finally spoke. What do you think was in those containers? Daniels didn't answer at first. Then he said slowly, I don't know, but it wasn't fish, and it wasn't legal. Brooks leaned forward. That man, Monroe, he didn't look like a criminal. He looked like someone who'd been through hell. Daniels nodded, and still walked out of it. The next day, Daniels received a strange package at the station. There was no return address. It was a plain black envelope sealed in plastic. His name was printed on the front. Only his name. No rank, no title. Just Daniels. He opened it carefully. Inside was a USB drive and a single piece of paper with one sentence. "When the truth matters more than the rules, plug this in." Daniels felt a chill run down his spine. He looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then he quietly slipped the drive into his coat pocket and went home early. That night, he shut all the curtains, locked the doors, turned off his phone, and plugged the USB drive into his personal laptop. The screen went black for a second. Then a video began to play. It was old footage, grainy, shot in a secret lab or underground facility. Men in lab coats were standing around a large glass chamber. Inside was something floating, something glowing. It looked like a strange liquid, light blue, pulsing like a heartbeat, just like the tube he had seen on Monroe's boat. A voice started narrating. It was calm, official, and clearly from the military. "This is Project Equinox. Phase 1 began in 2012, located off the Mariana Trench. Discovery of an unknown biological sample led to the development of synthetic regenerative fluids. Material appears to respond to thought patterns, suggesting a form of sentient intelligence." Daniels froze. He rewound that sentence. "Responds to thought patterns? Sentient intelligence? That didn't sound like science. That sounded like science fiction." The video continued. More images showed experiments being done on animals, and then, horrifyingly, on human subjects. Not civilians, but volunteers. Soldiers. They injected the glowing fluid into one of the men. Within seconds, the man's wounds began to heal. Cuts disappeared. Bruised skin turned normal. Broken bones straightened. But then things went wrong. Another clip showed the same man hours later, screaming in pain, his skin glowing from the inside. Then the video cut out. Daniels sat back in his chair, heart pounding. The voice returned. Due to instability, Project Equinox was shut down. All samples were ordered to be destroyed. However, Captain Elias Monroe took a shipment and disappeared. During transport, subject officially declared KIA. Project closed and buried. Daniels couldn't believe what he was hearing. The man he had stopped, the man with the glowing containers, had stolen a substance the government was trying to hide. Not a drug, not a weapon, but something alive, something that could heal or destroy. Suddenly the screen went black again, and a new video started. This time, Monroe appeared. It looked like a message he had recorded recently. "If you're watching this," Monroe said, "then you've already seen part of the truth. You've seen what they created, what they tried to destroy, and what I've been trying to protect." He looked older in this video. Tired, but strong. "They told us it could be used for good, to help soldiers, to save lives. But they lied. It wasn't meant to heal. It was meant to control. The fluid responds to thoughts. Yes, but not just thoughts. Emotions, fear, anger, pain. Once injected, the person becomes a weapon. A walking signal. They can be manipulated without even knowing it. That's what happened to my men. That's why I ran." Daniels leaned closer. Monroe's eyes were intense. "I took what I could and disappeared. I've been hiding ever since, moving, watching, making sure the fluid doesn't fall into the wrong hands. But now, they're getting close, and I can't hide much longer." The video ended with Monroe looking straight into the camera. "If you still believe in what's right, find me. Before they do." Then everything went dark. Daniels sat for a long time in silence. The room felt colder. He was shaking, but not from fear. From the weight of the truth. Everything they'd been told, Every rule he followed, every order he obeyed. It had all been part of a bigger lie. The next morning he met with Brooks in private. "I need your help," Daniels said. "But what I'm about to show you, it doesn't leave this room." Brooks watched the video. He didn't blink once. When it ended, he looked at Daniels and said, "So what do we do?" Daniels replied, "We find Monroe. They couldn't go through official channels. That would alert the same people who erased Monroe from history. Instead, they began searching for clues." Daniels remembered the coordinates where they had stopped, Monroe's boat. He pulled up a marine map and started tracing a route. Monroe had come from the south, deep waters near Cuba, past the Caribbean. Brooks pointed at a small island, barely marked on the map. "What's that?" Daniels looked it up. The island had no name, no official documentation, just a label, classified naval site, decommissioned. They knew what that meant. Another ghost site, probably where Project Equinox was first tested. Daniels made a decision. "We're going there." They took a small civilian boat and left, at night, telling no one. They packed gear, satellite phones, cameras, and their sidearms. The journey was long and quiet. The sea was calm, but both men were on edge. As they neared the island, fog began to roll in. It wasn't natural. The fog was thick, dense, and made the entire place feel like a dream. They docked quietly and stepped onto the shore. The island was covered in overgrown trees and vines, but there were signs of the past: rusted fences, broken satellite dishes, and the skeleton of an old military base. They moved slowly, carefully, and found a small building half buried under the ground. The door was sealed with an old keypad. Brooks touched the metal. "Do you think he's in there?" Daniels stepped back. "There's only one way to find out." Just as he reached for his tools to break the lock, they heard a noise, a low beep. Then the door opened on its own. A voice came from inside. "I was expecting you." Monroe stood in the shadows, holding a rifle, but he didn't raise it. Daniels stepped in. "You sent the video?" Monroe nodded. "I needed someone who hadn't sold their soul yet." They sat down in the underground room, lit by only a few hanging lights. Inside were more containers, maps, and documents. Monroe explained everything. The project had started as a way to create faster healing for soldiers, but the substance, the blue liquid, was not made by man. It was found deep under the sea, near volcanic vents. Scientists believed it was formed naturally, but Monroe wasn't so sure anymore. He believed it was sentient, a living thing. And once it connected with a human mind, it stayed linked. Forever. Some of his team became aggressive. Others had dreams that weren't theirs. Visions, voices. They lost control. Monroe had to shut it down, destroy the lab, and escape with the samples that hadn't been corrupted. Daniels asked, "Why not just destroy all of it?" Monroe looked at him, pain in his eyes. "Because there's a chance, just a chance, that it can be used for something good, if we understand it better, if we protect it. But the people who created this don't want to protect it. They want to use it, to control leaders, armies, nations." Daniels stood up. "Then we have to stop them." But Monroe shook his head. "It's too late for that. They already know you're here. You saw the video. You're a threat now." Just then, a sound echoed through the island, the distant hum of a helicopter. "They're coming," Monroe said. Daniels and Brooks drew their weapons. "Then let them come," Monroe smiled. "Now you're starting to understand." The sound of the helicopter grew louder. The small island, which had been silent for years, now felt alive with danger. Officer Daniels stood near the entrance of the underground room, listening carefully. Brooks was beside him, gripping his sidearm tightly. Captain Monroe remained calm. He had seen this coming? "They found us faster than I expected," Monroe said quietly. Daniels turned to him. "Can we escape?" Monroe didn't answer immediately. He looked up at a ventilation shaft and said, "There's a tunnel behind. The storage room. It leads to the cliffs on the eastern side. If we move fast, we can avoid a direct fight." Brooks looked unsure. "And what if they're already there?" Monroe looked at him with serious eyes. "Then we fight smart, not loud." Without wasting more time, the three of them gathered what they could: maps, the remaining vials of the glowing fluid, and a backpack filled with sealed data drives. Monroe handed each of them a small earpiece and said, "We stay in contact. No noise unless necessary. And remember, if they capture you, don't talk. Don't even think about talking." The tunnel was narrow and dusty. It hadn't been used in years. The air smelled of mold and rust. The three men crawled through it quietly, their flashlights barely lighting the path. The only sound was their breathing and the occasional drip of water hitting the ground. As they reached the exit, they paused. Monroe peeked out through a small crack in the rocks. The cliffside was steep, with jagged stones leading down to the sea. But what caught his attention was the silhouette of a black helicopter hovering above the island. Armed men in tactical gear were rappelling down. "They're not here to ask questions," Monroe whispered. Daniels tapped his earpiece. "What do we do?" Monroe replied, "Split up. They'll expect a group. I'll lead them away. You two go down the cliff and head toward the beach on the southern side." "There's a backup boat hidden there," Brooks protested. "You won't make it alone." Monroe smiled slightly. "I've done this for years. Trust me." Before they could argue more, Monroe slipped out of the tunnel and disappeared into the jungle-like trees. Daniels and Brooks watched him go, then turned and began climbing down the cliffs. The rocks were slippery, and one wrong step could mean falling into the ocean below. Daniels helped Brooks down slowly, both men keeping low to avoid being seen. The noise from the helicopter grew faint as it moved toward the northern part of the island. Monroe's plan was working. They finally reached the beach, panting and covered in sweat and dirt. Daniels looked around. There was no sign of soldiers yet. Behind a group of rocks, they found the hidden boat, a small inflatable raft with a silent electric motor. Brooks quickly started it while Daniels kept watch. As the boat moved quietly through the dark waters, Daniels looked back at the island. The top of the hill was glowing red from flares and flashlights. Explosions echoed faintly in the distance. "Do you think he made it out?" Brooks asked. Daniels didn't answer. He wanted to believe Monroe had escaped, but deep down, he wasn't sure. After a few hours at sea, they reached a small coastal town on the edge of Cuba. It was still early morning, and the streets were mostly empty. They docked the boat quietly and walked toward a nearby motel. They needed rest, but more than that, they needed answers. The data Monroe gave them was their only lead now. Inside the motel room, Daniels plugged one of the drives into his laptop. He had expected passwords, encryption, or military firewalls, but surprisingly it opened immediately. A folder labeled Equinox Final appeared. Inside were documents, videos, and something called the Sentience Report. Daniels opened it. The report explained everything in more detail than Monroe's video. The substance they found under the ocean wasn't just strange. It was alive. It was discovered in a deep trench where sunlight never reached. Scientists first thought it was a new form of algae or bacteria. But when they brought it to the surface, strange things happened. The substance reacted to the emotions of the people near it. It glowed brighter when someone was angry or scared. It dimmed when someone was calm. It seemed to understand feelings. Over time, it started to change. Not physically, but mentally. People working with the substance reported having the same dreams. They all dreamed of a dark underwater city, ancient and silent, with huge glowing towers. Some called it a hallucination. Others believed the substance was showing them something real. Then came the experiments. The government wanted to weaponize it. They tested it on animals first, then soldiers. At first, the results were amazing. Faster healing, more strength, no fear. But within days, the subjects began to lose control. One soldier broke out of the lab and had to be taken down by force. Another lost all memory of who he was. A third simply vanished. The worst part? Some of the researchers started changing too, even though they were never injected. Just being near the fluid for too long seemed to affect their minds. The report ended with one line written in bold: "Equinox is not a discovery. It is an awakening." Daniels leaned back. His heart was beating fast. He looked at Brooks. "This changes everything." Brooks nodded. "And now we're holding it." Suddenly there was a knock at the door. They both froze. Daniels reached for his gun. Brooks peered through the peephole. A woman stood outside, alone, wearing sunglasses and holding a small bag. She wasn't military, but something about her looked official. "Do we open?" Brooks whispered. Daniels thought for a second, then nodded. Brooks opened the door slightly. "Yes?" The woman spoke calmly. "I'm not here to hurt you. My name is Dr. Celine Vora. I worked on Equinox. I know what you're carrying, and I can help you." They let her in cautiously. She walked to the center of the room, removed her sunglasses, and looked directly at Daniels. "You saw the sentience report?" Daniels nodded. She sat down. "Then you know what we're dealing with." "And why Monroe disappeared?" Daniels asked. "Why did you come to us?" "Because I'm the last one who wants to stop this. The others, they don't care what it becomes. They only care about control. But I've seen what it does. I lost people because of it. Good people." Brooks said, "Then help us destroy it." But Dr. Vora shook her head. "You can't destroy something you don't understand. The truth is, we don't know what Equinox is. We only know what it can do. But if it was buried deep under the ocean for so long, there's a reason. It wasn't supposed to be found," Daniels said slowly. "So what do we do?" Vora looked at him. "There's a second site. The original site. Not the lab, but the place where they first touched the fluid. It's located in the trench itself. I have coordinates. If we go there, we might find answers. Or at least a way to end this." Daniels looked at Brooks. "Are we really going back to where it all started?" Brooks smiled slightly. "Why not? We've come this far." That night the three of them left Cuba in a fishing boat. The journey to the trench would take 2 days. The ocean was dark and quiet, but their minds were full of noise. Daniels thought about the people who had died, the ones who were changed, and Monroe, who might still be alive, or maybe not. He thought about the dreams, the glowing towers, and what it all meant. On the second night, something strange happened. Daniels woke up from a dream, one he had never had before. He was underwater, floating toward a huge black gate. It was open, and behind it was a light, bright and blue. He felt calm, almost like he belonged there. When he woke up, he looked at Dr. Vora. Her face was pale. "You saw it too, didn't you?" she asked quietly. Daniels nodded. They weren't near the trench yet, but Equinox was already reaching out to them. By the time they neared the coordinates, the sea had changed. The water was colder. The skies were cloudy. Even the boat's instruments started to glitch. They dropped anchor above the trench. The depth below them was impossible to measure accurately. The sonar showed nothing but darkness. Vora pointed to a spot on the map. "This is where it all began." Daniels stood over the edge, looking down into the endless sea. He could feel something watching him. Then, out of the silence, a voice came through the radio. It was broken, static-filled, but clear enough. "This is Monroe. If you're hearing this, turn back. It's waking up." Then the radio died. The radio went silent. That one voice, Monroe's voice, was enough to freeze the air in the boat. Daniels stared at the small speaker as if it would speak again. Brooks slowly turned the volume knob, but there was nothing. Only the soft hum of the ocean around them. Dr. Vora stood still, her eyes locked on the dark waves below. None of them said a word for a long time. Everyone was thinking the same thing. If Monroe was alive, that meant he had made it out. But if he had made it out, why was he sending a warning now? Daniels finally spoke. He said it's waking up. Vora nodded. It's been waiting, and now that we're here, it knows. Brooks didn't like the sound of that. Knows what? That we've returned, she said. They anchored the boat directly above the trench. The depth below them was more than 36,000 feet. No human could reach that deep without help. But Dr. Vora had something. In a metal case she brought with her, there was a high-pressure dive drone, small, silent, and built with AI tracking. It had a camera and sensor systems that would allow them to see everything below. She started setting it up while Daniels and Brooks watched the monitors. The deep-sea drone slowly sank into the water, light blinking softly. For the first few minutes, there was nothing but dark blue water on the screen. Then black. Then shapes began to form. Rocky walls, strange ridges, and movements that didn't seem like fish. At one point, the drone passed a huge stone structure, round, covered in layers of algae and thyme. It didn't look natural. It looked made, ancient, like a door buried by the sea. The camera feed began to flicker. Are we losing signal? Daniels asked. No, Vora said. It's interference. Like before. The same thing happened when they first found it. Suddenly the screen turned white. Not pure white, but glowing. Like a light had turned on somewhere in the trench. The drone camera picked it up. In the middle of the deep sea floor there was a structure. Tall, spiraled, made of some material that looked like black glass and bone. And something was pulsing at the center. It's alive, Brooks whispered. Vora pressed a button to zoom in. As they got closer, they saw the glowing fluid they had been carrying in vials, except now it was massive. The fluid was rising slowly, like it was breathing. It wasn't just lying still, it was moving, reacting. Then something unexpected happened. The camera cut to static. They lost the feed. Daniels slammed the desk. No, no, what happened? Before anyone could answer, a loud thud hit the side of the boat. They all turned. Another thud, and another. The boat rocked slightly. The calm ocean was suddenly moving in small, hard waves. It felt like something big was moving underneath them. Brooks rushed to the railing and looked over. There's something down there! Then, in a flash of foam and spray, something hit the boat from below. Everyone fell to the floor. The drone's signal came back, only for a second. The image was blurry, shaking, but something huge passed in front of the camera. It had no face, no shape, just size and light. The signal died again. Vora grabbed a handheld beacon from her bag. We need to leave, now. But what about the trench? Daniels asked. We're not equipped to fight it. Monroe tried. His team had weapons, plans, soldiers. And still, he failed. That thing, whatever it is, it's not from this world. Brooks was already starting the boat's engine, but then the motor stalled. Something was stopping them. A long black shadow passed under the water. For a moment it looked like the sea had split. The sky turned dark, and a low humming sound filled the air. It wasn't from the boat. It wasn't from the radio. It was from the water. Daniel suddenly gripped his head. He was sweating. I can hear it. Brooks turned. What do you mean? I hear it speaking. Not words, just feelings. Fear, hunger, anger. Vora stepped back. It's contacting us, through the fluid. The vials in her bag started glowing bright enough to light up the deck. They were shaking inside the case. Brooks opened the emergency flare gun. "What are you doing?" Daniels asked. "We need to distract it. Just for a second. Get it away from the boat." He aimed at the water and fired. The red flare hissed into the air and exploded. The sea didn't react at first, but then everything changed. Waves hit the side of the boat. A whirlpool started to form near the back, and something began to rise. From the depths, the structure they saw in the drone footage started emerging slowly, like it was never underwater, only sleeping beneath the surface. Black spires reached up. Glowing blue lines ran through them like veins. At the center, a pulse of light, beating like a heart. The water around it boiled, not from heat, but energy. Daniels fell to his knees. The sound in his head was getting louder. "It wants us." Vora helped him up. "No, it wants to return. It wants to spread. That's why Monroe warned us, not to protect us, but to stop it." Suddenly the radio came back on. Monroe's voice again, clearer now. "If you're hearing this, destroy the samples. The vials. Don't bring them back. Don't let it reach land." Daniels grabbed the metal case. "We have to throw it overboard." Vora hesitated. "If we lose it, we lose the only chance to study it." Brooks shouted, "It's not about study. It's about survival." With a deep breath, Daniels threw the case into the ocean. The moment it hit the water, everything paused. The waves stopped, the light in the spires dimmed. The sound in Daniels' head faded, and the sea went still. The whirlpool closed. The glowing veins in the spires turned black, and slowly, silently, the ancient structure began to sink again, disappearing into the trench. The engine of the boat roared back to life on its own. They didn't speak. They just turned the boat away and left. Hours later, as the sun rose, the island was far behind them. The sea was calm, almost too calm. Daniels sat quietly, staring at the horizon. Brooks was steering. Vora was checking the last few files on her laptop. They had no more vials, no more data, only memories of what they saw. Daniels finally broke the silence. "What happens now?" Vora didn't answer at first. Then she closed the laptop. "We make sure no one else goes back." "Not ever?" Brooks asked. "And Monroe?" No one replied. But deep down, they all knew. Monroe was part of the ocean now. Whether alive or not, he had become part of the thing he was trying to stop. When they reached the mainland, they expected to be met by agents, soldiers, questions. But no one came. No one even knew they had left. It was as if the whole mission had been erased from existence. Daniels went back to his home quietly. He quit the Coast Guard. Brooks moved to a quiet town in Mexico. Vora disappeared. Some say she changed her name and started a new life somewhere in Europe. Others say she's still watching the trench, waiting for signs. But something strange started happening after that. People around the world started having similar dreams. Dreams of the dark sea, of a black city under the water, of a light calling them home. Scientists dismissed it, said it was stress or mass psychology, but Daniels knew better. He still hears it sometimes, at night, a soft hum deep in his ears, calling. And every time he walks by the ocean, he feels it, waiting.